Okay. Well, I know you enjoyed that, and you probably have a lot of questions, but I get to ask the first one. And first, I think everyone should introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Cathi Perry, Nellie Mae Rowe's great-grandniece.
I'm Katie Jentleson. I'm the Curator of Folk and Self-Taught Art at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta.
I'm Ringbom, one of the directors of the film you just watched.
So, Petter, when I was looking at your website, you said that your mission was to give life to the creative underdogs, which of course Nellie is a prime example. I was wondering how the origin story behind this film.
Yeah, well, it includes, well, the ladies sitting next to me right here, Cathi and Katie. So we have to back up now to 2016, pre-pandemic. I was asked by the Judith Alexander Foundation, which is basically the foundation that was formed from the estate of Judith Alexander, Nellie's gallerist. And they asked some filmmakers to come to Atlanta to talk to them about a possible film project about Nellie Mae Rowe. So the foundation, basically their whole mission is to carry on the work that Judith was doing. And they wanted to talk about films. And we felt like probably they had envisioned something maybe a little less ambitious than what we wanted to do. But we gladly met with them, and we managed to convince them that, okay, we should definitely make a film about Nellie Mae Rowe, and we should be really ambitious. We should make it a feature film that can play, a feature-length film that can play at, the best film festivals in the world, and it can help, in a way, correct history to shine the light on someone who we felt had not been gotten the recognition that she deserved during her lifetime, which really was in line with what Judith wanted to do. And the creative underdog part is, I think that both me and my production partner Marquis Stillwell, who cannot be here today, that's the kind of stories we've always been attracted to. And Nellie, in some ways, I don't think that she ever thought of herself as an underdog. Cathi, I'm sure you could speak to this. But from an outsider's perspective, she definitely is that, because she didn't, she wasn't educated. She didn't have that kind of formal background. She in some ways came from nothing and made something quite beautiful from her work and from her life. And that film, the whole film, is inspired by that.
As a journalist, I am so impressed with all the research that you did, and all the connections that you made, and the way you set it in the broader history of Atlanta. And I'd like you to talk about how you went about finding this information, and I'm sure our other panelists will have some comments too.
Sure. I mean, in a way, I sort of short-shifted or short-changed the question, your original question about the origin of it, because the first conversation happened in 2016, but it went on, and obviously it took many years to get to this point, and part of that is because of research, and part of it is because of a pandemic. But the research part, I think we spent 2 years just talking to people, including Cathi and including Katie and including a number of people that the Judith Alexander Foundation or the original kind of starting point, the people that they could connect us with. And I need to get a special shout out for Judith Augustine, who is in the audience here, who is there we go. Our fierce cheerleader and Atlanta coordinator through all of these years. So because of who Nellie was and when the time that she lived in, there was definitely a lack of resources and materials to go to study. I mean, at this point, I think there were 2 exhibition catalogs. There's photographs and there's a couple of short films. To really get to know her and her story, we had to talk to people. So we spent the first 2 years just talking to the people that knew her, that are still alive, thankfully, and people that has studied her over the years, and and then also general historians of Atlanta and so on and so forth. So that took a long time, and when we had gone through that process, that became the situation, the moment where we sat down and decided, okay, now we know these things. How do we tell the story in the most effective or interesting way when we are lacking in the archival material, part? Like, there isn't that much that we can use in order to tell the story. What we have is an amazing character, and we have a lot of stories that have been told about her. What if we try to reimagine her life? And that's what we went out to try to do, starting with basically the idea of reimagining her house, the playhouse. That was the starting point, and then we felt like that's not enough. I mean, that's an amazing place, but Nellie is missing. So then we tried to do first a sort of a puppetry version of her, which felt short, and then we ended up doing basically a 3D character animation version of her, together, working very closely with Cathi and the rest of the family to figure out how we can get Nellie right, and Judith as well. So that was what we did. And then what if we try to basically film this character as if she was alive, as if we were making a documentary about someone who was still there, and maybe that's the way to get to her spirit.
And I think that was a huge risk that you all took that really paid off. And I remember I started working at the High in late 2015, so kind of right around the same time that you were working on this film. I was just coming to Atlanta and getting to know Nellie Mae Rowe and the incredible collection of her work that the High has. And as we got to know each other and talked about kind of our approaches, me towards an exhibition of her work and you all towards your movie, I was super impressed by your willingness to take that risk, to kind of try to recreate this world, right, and this magic that this person, clearly had. And I wonder, Cathi, if you would talk a little bit about how that felt for you, this kind of possibility of recreating the magic of someone you were so close to.
To think about it as magic, I would have to go back to my childhood, because this is something that was part of my life, my whole life. And it didn't seem out of the norm. It was something that we did every weekend. We went to visit Aunt Nellie, and it was such an adventure every visit. I mean, the things that were there to play with as kids. You always got the sweetbread, which was pound cake. And she had all these fruit trees in her yard, and she made fruit wine and that type of thing. We wasn't supposed to talk about that, but we were able to every once in a while taste the wine. But the way that Petter and Marquise and Rushi and everybody put the story together was incredible, because it was very much like what it actually was.
Did it feel like her?
It did. Her energy was there. Yes.
One of my favorite moments in this process we built these sets, right? We built these sets of Nellie's house, the playhouse. We did that in New Orleans together with the studio there, and Cathi and a number of the people from the Judith Alexander Foundation came to New Orleans to check out the sets. And I had these great, we were in the middle of filming, basically, but I have these great photographs of you basically rediscovering your childhood sort of playhouse. It was incredibly sweet. And that set, going full circle, part of it, Katie at the High Museum were able to incorporate into the the exhibit that started open in Atlanta and then been touring around the country, and had part of the sets had now made a permanent home at the High Museum, which we're very excited about.
I think it's time to open up the floor. Do any of you in the audience have questions? Unfortunately, we do not have mics out in the audience, so you will have to really project.
Really loud.
Yes. Sir.
Yes, how did the scene in Kuwait come about?
Social media. During our research, we basically just stumbled upon this school that had incorporated Nellie's work into their education. We didn't know about it. I don't think anyone knew about it, but we found them on Instagram and reached out, and we're too excited not to figure out a way to include them. Basically what we're trying to do in the film as much as possible is to show rather than tell. A more traditional approach to talking about an artist's legacy would have experts like Cathi or someone else talking about, this is why Nellie Rowe is still important to this day, right after her death. We felt like what better way to illustrate it than to have kids so as far away as Kuwait studying this person that basically never left Vining, Georgia, to show the kind of legacy and the kind of relevance that someone like Nellie Rowe could have through, after her passing.
Thank you. Any other questions? Stand up. Okay. Right there.
I just wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about how Nellie's extended family ended up in Georgia.
How Nellie's extended family ended up in Georgia. Well, Cathi, that would be yours.
We're born and raised in Georgia.
Sorry.
We were born and raised in Georgia just as she was.
And your grandparents were slaves?
No. No, that was her father was a slave.
And do you know anything about his history or parents' history?
I really don't know.
Thank you. Next question.
It's actually, part of it's really hard to actually go back to study. You could there are some records, there are census records of Nellie as a child that we have found or that we looked at.
Yeah.
But there's the data is so it's so incomplete. It's very hard to know how beyond that, basically.
And a kind of amazing thing that the film turned out to start with that opening sequence of when was Nellie born, and myself and members of your family were talking about, well, it's 4th of July, 1900. And when we did research for our exhibition and the book that we published alongside it, we looked at all the census records, and there were 10 different census records that put her birth date not at 4th of July, 1900, but all different dates. But the point it didn't matter, because that was how she told her story. And that was the kind of emphasis that she placed, that she was a Black American born on Independence Day at the turn of the century, and she knew what she was doing, when she placed herself on that date. And so, yeah, I think the question was about whether there's ancestral relations, possibly different parts of Africa, and your family hasn't necessarily done that research, right? But even just to place Nellie's birth date in US Census records is really difficult, because the archive is so lacking, which is again part of why the risk that you all took to try to place Nellie in all these other different contexts and recreate her world rather than just relying on what we have in the archive was so brilliant.
Yes.
So, my question is about distribution, and I'm very aware of this is a Jewish film festival, so you're here with that hat on. But this is also a film that belongs to Atlanta and to the communities in Atlanta and to the children of Atlanta and the Black communities. I mean, I felt really inspired in my own creativity seeing this film. And so I'm curious, are you just going to distribute it through film festivals, or will it be available to local people?
Thank you for that question. So happily, you know, we do have distribution for the film. You know, we've been screening it now for almost a year, across the country and internationally. It actually had theatrical distribution in Sweden before here. So it screened, it was opened in 10 or 12 different towns all across Sweden. And I have a backstory to that, a little story that I want to add to that, but if I just, I'll get back to it. But the film will be distributed. It will open in theaters across the country later this spring, and including in Atlanta, and then, you know, all the parts of the country where, you know, that has an art cinema or it has an audience that would be interested in it. And eventually it will end up either on TV or on streamers. We have an educational distributor, as it calls, so the film will hopefully reach, you know, schools across the country as well.
Good.
Yeah. Oh, back to my story about Sweden. All right. So Cathi and I and Cheryl and a number of other people, we were in Stockholm for the Swedish premiere of the film. And it was a really special moment for this whole project, and it kind of speaks towards the inclusivity and kind of the bigger concept around making a film that you can kind of inspire other activities, and you can connect beyond, you know, just the screen. We were able to facilitate the first gift of Nellie Rowe's work to a European art museum. So the Stockholm Museum of Modern Art now has 2 pieces of her work in their permanent collection. And Cathi and I and Ruchi, Metal, our producer, and Cheryl, who's Cathy's sister, were all there to deliver these pieces to the museum, and it was a pretty cool moment for. I mean, I'm Swedish, and I haven't mentioned that, so it was a special moment for me, for sure.
I think we have time for one more question.
Very quick one. What was the date on the white horse piece that was said to be her first painting? Do you have an idea of the date on that?
1964.
So this was a lot of work in a short period of time. 64. And where is she buried? Here in Atlanta? Or
Fayetteville, Georgia.
in Fayetteville? What cemetery?
It's at Flat Rock AME Church. As a matter of fact, a couple weeks ago, there was a bench dedicated at her gravesite there. Yeah, it's a family cemetery, yeah.
Has the whole family seen the movie?
No.
Well, I think our time is up. We could probably stay here all night asking about this fascinating film. So let's congratulate
Thank you so much.